welcome to our house. If this were an actual art tour like we've had so many years in the past, we'd be offering you a cup of tea and some homemade bread and jam. But I guess we'll just do what we have to do this year, and I hope you'll join me anyway and sit down and have a cup of tea in your own house. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the background of how I got into basket weaving, and show you a little bit of how I make a basket. In 1992, my husband Michael and I moved from Illinois out to an old log cabin near Dorchester, and we realized we had to find a way to earn a living. There was no electricity there, and we couldn't afford to put any in, and thought, well, why do we need it? So Michael, who had been doing woodworking for a number of years, converted to all hand tools, which meant going to a lot of auctions and garage sales and finding second-hand tools, which he did and loved. I did not know what to do, but luckily met a gal who's become a good friend, Jean Murray, who was on the tour with her fabric art for many years, and she taught me how to weave baskets, because that's what she used to do. So I've been weaving baskets for about 25 years, and one of the great things about this enterprise is that I don't need any fancy tools. I don't need a big bank account to start on this. The reed that I use, which comes from a tropical palm tree called a rattan palm, is relatively inexpensive, and it comes in different widths and round or flat or half oval. It comes in a lot of different ways that I can use it to make quite a wide variety of baskets. And the tools I need, oh, by the way, I order this through, there are several local basketry supply places, and that's where I ordered all my materials. And also, people have given me a lot when they've been excited about weaving baskets, and then something happens and they never get to it. So they want to get rid of them, and they give them to me. So I've got quite a stockpile of materials. In fact, one friend brings me deer ribs to use as handles, or antlers for handles. And I just love that. You know, anything we can use from the natural world is the best. So, and those are renewable resources. So I need scissors, some kind of measuring device, pencil or two, needle nose pliers, and awl, plain old table knife without too sharp an end, some kind of a pocket knife, measuring tape, lots of clothespins, and sometimes I even need pruning shears for some of the bigger, tougher pieces of reed. And all these things we had available. I didn't have to go out and buy anything to start my basket weaving. So when I'm going to make a basket, and usually it's because I need more baskets for an art show, or somebody has ordered a special basket that I haven't made before, I have to figure out how I'm going to do it. When I first learned, I used several really good books that gave excellent directions about basket weaving and told me exactly what dimensions I needed, what materials to cut out, you know, the length and what kind of materials. And I mean, they laid it all out for me, which made it really easy to learn. Because of all this good training from the books and from Jean Murray, I could vary those baskets in size, you know, able to figure out what different lengths of materials I would need to start out and how much and what kind. And from there could go on to design some new baskets that would fit the requirements that people who had ordered one had, which makes it a lot more fun. Basket weaving really is fun. Sometimes it's relaxing, But sometimes my husband said he learned an awful lot of new words from me when I was challenged. So when I start out with one like the one I'm going to show you today, the Williamsburg basket, it gives the directions for one size. And because I wanted to do a bigger one and a smaller one, you know, I just changed those directions to fit what I wanted. So what I first did was take a 5/8 inch reed, find the rough side, because there is a rough side and a smooth side to reed. You know, it's from a living tree, and if you put the rough side on the outside, then it tends to fray and break. So you always put the rough side on what's going to be the inside of the basket. So I would measure and mark. And in this particular basket, I was measuring, this is 3/8 inch reed, and I was measuring 13 pieces that were 20 inches long. I mean, not rocket science, but important in ending up with the product you want. So I just measure the midpoint, because that helps to line up the pieces when I'm starting the bottom of the basket, and cut. So measured 13 of those, and then I soak them. Reed is flexible, but it's also brittle if you try to bend it too sharply. So I soak it just in a bucket of water for a few minutes, depending on the thickness and how sharp an angle I'm going to have to be bending it. Some people use glycerin, and that I think is great, you know, in the water to help keep it more flexible. But we've always had dogs, and they always had access to my soaking water, so I didn't want them to be drinking glycerin. So after the reed is soaked, I lay out the pieces in a pattern on the table, or whatever surface I'm working on, and the book shows pictures of how it is best to do that. If you're starting with a handle that is incorporated in the whole basket like this one is, then you put the handle down as one of the pieces of the spokes. The initial pieces that you're using are called spokes. If I'm going to incorporate a handle in later, then I just follow the pattern and stick the handle in before I'm ready to put the rim together. I'll tell you about that later. Some baskets, of course, don't even have a handle, and that's even simpler. But let's show you what we start out with. So here's the bottom of the basket. You can see the handle is incorporated into it. And because this kind of handle has, at these joints, it's dovetailed, and I don't think it's very strong, I glue a piece of leather on the bottom of every handle that I have that's dove jointed, and I feel like that gives it a lot more strength. And I think it's kind of attractive. So I lay out the spokes on the bottom and weave them together and measure carefully, because I want it to be the right size for when I'm ready to upset the basket, which just means turning up the spokes and starting to weave with a weaver. And in this case, the weaver is the same dimension as the spokes. In many baskets, it's a lot smaller. It's 1/4 inch is probably one of the most common dimensions to use for weaving. But in this particular kind of basket, the spokes and the weavers are the same dimension. And the first couple rows, actually the first 3 rows, are pretty crucial, because that's when you're bringing the spokes up into the shape that you want the basket to begin with. And if you pull them up too tightly, you can end up with a basket that's so tight together it doesn't look right, and it's hard to put together at the end, because I've done that with some weed baskets that start out kind of about this big, and if I pull too tight, then they're about that big at the end, and oh my gosh, that's a problem. This one, I follow the shape of the handle. So I pull it up tight in the beginning and then gradually loosen it so that it's following the shape, because I like this shape. I think Williamsburg baskets just have a very appealing shape. So again, you have to find the rough side, and sometimes if the reed is really good, it's hard to find which is rough. usually if you run your fingers along the reed, you can see little hairs sticking up. And you always put the rough side towards the inside of the basket. And you always start the end on the outside of a spoke that's on the outside of the last row. I don't know if that's very clear, but the reason is you want to cover it up. You want to cover that end up when you come all the way around the basket, and that's the easiest way to do it. And it's just, this one is just basic, simple over-under weaving. And you notice I have clothespins all over the basket. I don't know what I'd do without clothespins, because that's what holds the basket together in the first 3 or 4 rows. So it's basically just over-under weaving, shaping the basket as you go, pulling it out a little bit at the corners because the basket is the handle is starting to go out a little. Pinning each corner, because that's where the slippage can happen, especially. And packing the rows down together. You want the basket to be tight. You don't want lots of light showing through, because you don't know what you're going to hold in this basket. Of course, this one has kind of an open bottom. Some of them I weave have a very tight bottom, and you can put things in there that that otherwise would fall through this one. But a basket is much sturdier if you weave up the sides and pack them down tightly. Okay. And of course, when I'm doing this without demonstrating, I can do it a lot faster because I usually hold the basket in my lap after I've gotten it started. And that, I think, probably a lot of basket weavers do that. You just have more control of it if it's in your lap, and you can sometimes hold it with your legs, especially if you're working on a large basket. Then you really need that extra control. You see how you can see the pattern really easily on the handle. Okay, sometimes I get carried away with clothespins and tend to use more than I probably need, but that's okay. Better too many than too few. When I get around to the beginning, let's see, I'm going to clip that one. You notice how flexible this material is now that it's been soaked. That really makes a difference. Okay, when I get to the beginning, I'm going to overlap the beginning 4 spokes. So I put the weaver over the beginning part of the weaver, under the next one, following the beginning weaver, and then when it's lined up with the right edge of the 4th weaver, I cut it off and tuck it in. And that way you don't see the seam if I do it right. Pack it down, make sure it's tight. That way you don't see the seam, and it's going to stay. It's going to hold itself together, which is really important. You don't want your basket pulling apart. So what I would do with this basket is continue to soak the 3/8 inch reed, continue to weave each row separately, and start on a different side each time, because you don't want to build up that extra thickness all on one side. So no matter whether the basket is a tall one or a short one or big or small, the next step after I weave it as high as I want it is to bend over the spokes that are on the outside of the basket, on the outside of the weavers. Bend those over the top weaver and tuck those spokes down inside the weavers inside the basket. And that's what keeps it snug together and keeps its shape. So that's a really important part of the process. And before I would do that, I would soak all these spokes again. Just dip them in the basket and soak them a little bit so that they're nice and flexible, because they're going to be making a sharp right angle bend, and it's a lot sturdier if they don't crack with every bend. So after I get all the spokes that are on the outside of the weaver, all those tucked in on the inside, then I cut off the other spokes flush with the top weaver. And then I need to make a rim. And that's using a heavier, usually wider piece of reed, soaking it well, measuring it so it's going to be plenty big enough to go around. So obviously this one wouldn't quite make it because it has to overlap 4 spokes, just like every weaver does. So I would put a weaver on the outside and pin it on. You know, I go around and pin it on so it would be exactly where I wanted it. And then I would put a weaver on the inside. And both times I have to be conscious of which is the rough side and which is the smooth side. And I want the rough sides to be hidden. So I'm going to turn the rough side on the outside rim to the inside. And the rough side on the inside rim goes to the outside, and they will both be hidden when they're sandwiched together. So I measure that all the way around and cut them the right length, and then I need to put some kind of a rim filler because it's a sandwich and it doesn't quite close together if I've chosen the correct width for the rim. So I usually use as a rim filler something like this. It's called Braided Seagrass, and it's very attractive and flexible, and it just makes a nice appearance as well as filling in that gap. Then I have to lash on that rim. I have to hold that on some way. So it's over the top weaver. That's where its place is. And then I'm going to use usually 1/4-inch reed or 1/8-inch reed. 3/16 inch reed. This is 1/4-inch. And I soak it really well because this is going to be used to go around the rim and underneath the top weaver. And then around the rim, around where the next spoke would be, and underneath the top weaver. So it's going to go all around the basket that way, all the way back to the beginning. And that's holding the basket really well together. That gives it its strength that it needs. It's not going to come apart unless the basket is ill-treated and some of the spokes or weavers or rim get broken. Otherwise, baskets can last for a long, long time. So how about if I show you what it looks like on a completed basket? This is the rim, which is what I was working on here, attempting to show you how. It's kind of complicated to explain. And the first time you do it, it's complicated. But like anything else, you know, practice really helps. So with this rim, there's a rim piece on the outside and one on the inside. And you see the lasher goes around underneath each, well, underneath the top weaver, above that second weaver. You have to use, this is where I use my knife, because I have to make a space in the damp basket. I have to pry a space, sorry, on this side, so that I can fit the weaver through. This one I went all the way around in one direction with a weaver slanting to the right, and then when I get back to the beginning place where I started, I reverse direction and go around so that the weaver is slanting to the left, making these very attractive X's. And that's for added strength. Sometimes with a small basket that isn't going to be used for heavy use, I only go around once. But generally with large baskets, this Williamsburg and this even larger one, it's wise to do as much lashing as you can. On this one, when I used the lasher around the second time, I did every other spoke, just to give it a different look. You see how different the results are. I like that. It's nice to vary some things a little. Partly because I get bored doing the exact same thing over and over, and partly because I just think it's attractive, and it's still very sturdy. This one especially can hold a lot. Part of that reason is this strong handle that's incorporated in the whole basket with the leather piece put on to keep it from coming apart at the corners. But you can see the same kind of pattern that I used for the little one, just different size. So after I finish weaving a basket, after I've put the rim on, lashed it on tight, then I set it on a flat surface and put some kind of a board as a weight, and often an additional weight, like a book or a sandstone, because I want the basket to be drying evenly. I want it to dry level. I want it to be squared on the bottom, or whatever shape it is supposed to be on the bottom. And it's still fairly damp, because every time, if I don't continue weaving the whole basket in one sitting, which I usually don't, that's too long a sitting, then I put it in a plastic bag to keep it damp. And so it's still damp. It takes the shape as it dries, and sometimes it takes a couple days to dry thoroughly. So after it's dried and is the shape that I want it to be, then you notice the different color of the reed. This is the natural color, this light color. Almost every basket that I make, I stain with Minwax, which is a wood preservative as well as a color. And I use Golden Oak or Early American. Those are the colors I use the most because I think they look the most natural. But I feel it's important to put a stain on any basket that's actually going to be used for something other than decoration, because it does help preserve it. I have a friend who has made, she liked one of the baskets that I made so well, called a Hearth Basket. She liked that for gathering her vegetables. So she came and learned how to make hearth baskets, and over a couple of years she made 2 more, and she uses those for gathering her vegetables from her huge garden. And she always takes good care of them, but they get dirty, they're bound to. You can wash off a basket. You don't want to soak it, because that tends to fray the reed, and it also tends to lose its shape, especially if it doesn't have a handle that's incorporated in, which helps keep the shape. But you can, use a cloth, a damp cloth, to clean off a basket. It's best to keep it in a fairly dry place, because if it's too damp, I've had reed get moldy, because it was a live product, and if it's too damp, like some of our summers are, and I haven't used it for a long time, it can be moldy, and it's okay, because when I stain it, that kills the mold, and it's not going to damage anything or anybody. So that's basically how you make this kind of basket. There are so many varieties of baskets, and some of them, for instance, an egg basket, and I don't think I have one of those to show you, but an egg basket starts with 2 handles that are, let me put this together. You probably recognize this shape if you've ever seen an egg basket. Okay, this would be the handle, and then this is the rim. And instead of starting out weaving at the bottom like this, generally people start out making what they call a God's eye, which is certainly a lovely shape to hold these 2 handles together. You make one on each side, and then from there you start weaving at the rim with usually a fine 1/4 inch or 3/16 inch weaver. And you have to keep that really well soaked, because you make right angle bends at the rim where you start, and then you go. It's kind of tricky to explain without being able to show you, but you put spokes in as you're progressing. They can stick right into the God's eye. These little fine, usually they're about pencil thin or even finer than that. And you make points on those spokes and stick them into the God's eye, which holds them in place. And then when you're weaving from the rim, you're weaving over, under each spoke. And it's tricky because you have to get those spokes the right length so that you end up with the shape you want. And if you pull too tight, it really is a problem. It messes up the shape. If it's too loose, then it's too wobbly. It doesn't hold together as well. But once you've learned to do an egg basket, it's very satisfying. You don't have to go through all this rim bit because the rim is formed naturally over this handle. Well, rim handle. I just think it's cool, all the different ways you can weave baskets. Sometimes when I make what's called a solid bottom shaker basket, I'm using, as I'm doing the bottom, I'm also weaving in a finer, probably 1/4 inch or in this case maybe even a 3/8 inch, in between these spokes. And often that's a continuous weave. You know, I'll weave it over, under, and then when I get to the other side, just bend it, turn it around that spoke, and come back over, under. And that makes a really tight bottom. It's, I like that. In fact, I've got one I can show you with that bottom. Oh, this one is. This is my old basket that I use for holding all my tools, is a shaker solid bottom basket. And then when you get to the end of the bottom, you keep using that continuous weave to go all the way up the sides. You're adding a weaver every once in a while, but it's not the start-stop process with each row individual like it is on this basket. So there's so many different ways of weaving and so many different shapes and sizes and uses for baskets. It's always exciting to start out with things like this and end up with something that is really useful and attractive and will last for a long time. It's satisfying. So here are some examples of some of the different kinds of baskets. This one actually starts out with spokes in a wheel pattern. Is that right? Yeah. And I use a round reed to lash them together, which I think makes a beautiful pattern on the bottom. This one you can probably see that pattern better. I just think that is so neat. I don't even know what it's called, but I guess it doesn't matter because it's just a neat pattern. Another way of making a very sturdy basket. I think this is very similar to the way bushel baskets are made. You know, they are started with this kind of a pattern in the bottom. Okay, and this is a completely different kind of handle, a little wire handle. These are available through the basketry supply place too. And these are obviously added at the end when you're putting the rim on, and they are attached to a piece that is incorporated in the rim, a metal piece. So they're very sturdy. They're not going to pull apart. They can hold some good weight. This one's called a bean pot. I think that's pretty cute. Now here's another one that's a completely different style. This is called a Choctaw Pouch. And that started out in a different fashion too. This one I had to follow the directions very carefully the first couple times I made it because it's tricky. But again, it makes a very nice wall hanging basket that one of our friends bought years ago for her daughter to use as a lunch basket when she went to school. I just thought that was charming. And it was basically an Indian design. You know, a lot of the Native Americans made their own baskets using materials that they had around where they lived. So probably not too many used reed, because reed comes generally from the Pacific Rim, you know, Vietnam and Thailand and places like that. And it's machine cut in China and then sent over here. But a lot of baskets were made from grasses and pine needles, big long pine needles. I tried one of those once and it just about drove me batty because they're so slippery and oh goodness, that takes a lot of patience to to end up with a pine needle basket. In fact, there are a lot of baskets that are very specific, and you have to follow the pattern and the shape so carefully. And I'm not a real detail person. I like the fact that baskets allow for a little a give and take here and there. And if you make a basket and make a mistake in the process, you can always take it apart to go back where you made, if it's an obvious mistake. If it's not a mistake that doesn't hurt the basket, then leave it in. That makes it just more individual. You know, baskets aren't made in factories, they're made by hand. That's one of the neat things about them. Can make little tiny baskets. This is a business card basket. Or you can make, you know, fairly good sized baskets, like this market basket, with shaker tape handles. Shaker tape is a wonderful woven, very strong fabric that the Shaker people initiated. And it's, I just think it's a wonderful material. It's very strong and it goes all the way around the basket, which, you know, just, I mean, you can't get much stronger than that, I don't think. And it comes in different colors and patterns, and so it's a nice thing to use as handles too. So we lived out in our cabin, our non-electric cabin, for 25 years, and then just got too old to do all the things that were necessary anymore for surviving there. The firewood and the water from the pump, and it just got to be too hard. So 3 years ago we moved into Wakan, but continued with doing our crafts. Michael's workshop was in the garage, and I thought I would have a workshop out in an add-on porch that was there, but it's too hard to heat in the winter and it gets too hot in the summer, so I'm fine using the end of the dining room table. You know, that's one of the nice things about basketry. It's you don't need a special place to make your baskets. It just works in almost any area. This is a little different basket that I thought you might like to see. It has a flat piece of wood incorporated in the bottom, which makes it very nice for a tray basket. If you're carrying drinks out to your patio, you know, just the basketry bottom might be a little bit unstable, but putting in a wooden piece, and you can take it out if you don't want it. So I like that. And you'll probably notice all the furniture and small woodenware items and signs and picture frames and mirrors and all these things that Michael made for years in his non-electric workshop. This is not a paddle for kids. This is actually a pot stick for stirring a big pot of soup or jam or whatever. I think many of you came to our cabin, and we always enjoyed all the visiting, all the people we got to know, many of whom became good friends. And I know that was one of Michael's favorite things, was these tours. They were stressful in that we had so many people coming, you know, we couldn't even demonstrate, and we had to do a lot of preparation, and we were exhausted by the end of the day, and even more exhausted by the end of the 3 days. But it was always just a very inspiring time to talk with so many good friends. The signs that Michael carved over the years, I think, were very representative of our philosophy and how we thought we should live. And so, don't know what more to say about that, but I hope by next year we'll be able to have a real live tour with everybody coming and visiting again. Meanwhile, this year, I hope to see you some way, and that you enjoy the virtual tour with all the artists and all their wonderful creations. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.